Awesome. Awesome. Oh, hello, everybody, and welcome back to our webinar series today. I'm going to give everyone a few minutes to roll on in as we are kicking things off. We've got a ton of interesting things to go through today. But as always, I always like to start by asking, where is everybody from? Paula, where are you actually in the world today? Just remind me.
I'm in London. I'm in central London today, in a booth, which is why my lighting is so terrible, in the Albright in Mayfair, top of Regent Street.
Very nice. Is that where you're normally based out of?
Yes, yeah. I do all my work from here, yeah.
Beautiful. And what about yourself, Mostyn? Where are you?
I am dialing in from home in central London in Shoreditch.
Oh, see, this is nice parts of London. I didn't live in the nice parts of London when I was there. It was it was a very different experience. Mr. Keeling, I have got a sneaking suspicion you're up in Shropshire.
I certainly am, sir. Very close to the Welsh border.
Very, very close to the Welsh border. It's a beautiful part of the world. How is the weather up there today, though?
It's not too bad, actually. We've had a bit of sunshine the last couple of days, but that's not typical of this part of the world.
No. From prior experience, it typically rains a lot. For those joining us, welcome. Feel free to drop in the chat where you guys are from. Be great to hear from everyone in the audience. Welcome to today's conversation. We're going to be talking about why HR are so busy, which I suspect for everyone joining, thank you for taking the time out, because I suspect you are very busy. But today I am joined by an amazing panel. We really wanted to put together people who were not only kind of knowledgeable around the subject, but felt really passionate about both people and the HR profession, and actually just creating a greater place to work. And I'm very fortunate that the guests we've got today are all of those things. I'm going to kick off, actually. Let's start with a few introductions. So if you've not met me before, my name's Ted. I'm the head of business development here at the People Experience Hub. But I'm also joined, though, by far more interesting people than myself. Mostyn, would you like to go first and perhaps introduce yourself for me?
Sure, thanks, Ted. So my name is Mostyn Wilson. I'm a leadership advisor and executive coach, and I work one-on-one with senior executives, and I also do group sessions known as masterclasses with people on high performance for professionals, helping them learn how to do their work better so that they can leave work earlier rather than later and enjoy their jobs and keep performance going for weeks, months and years. So it's a little bit about me.
And I'll be candid as well, Mostyn. When I saw you talk about a lot of this stuff at your Disrupt HR talk, which was really what the inspiration for this and really where it kind of came from, because I thought some of the stuff you were talking about was really important. So we'll get into that shortly. Paula, would you mind also introducing yourself for me?
Yeah, thanks, Ted, and so lovely to be here. And this is a really important topic, and I've not seen it talked about in this context that much, so I think it's really important to do that. So I'm Paula Leach. I run a company called Vantage Points Consulting, and I'm an author, I'm a speaker, and I'm an executive coach. But my background is in HR. I spent nearly 30 years in this profession, working in all different organisations, multinational organisations, and for government, I was the Chief People Officer in the Home Office, and also Global Chief People Officer for a FTSE 250 company before setting up on my own. And the reason I feel passionate about this is our profession is so critical and important if we are able to get upstream and work strategically with organisations. So, but we are absolutely critical to the foundations of everything, because the foundations of everything is humans. So that's why I feel passionate about it, and I'm really delighted to be here, get more into the discussion.
I'm delighted to have you as well. I think that perspective of like both looking at it globally, but actually just focusing down onto the individual and the people, I think it's going to be super valuable. Finally, my final guest today, unfortunately, we'd advertised that Georgina Kelly would be joining us. Unfortunately, she can't make it. However, fear not, for we have the one, the only Jamie Keeling, who's been able to dial in at the last minute. Jamie, would you mind introducing yourself for this wonderful audience?
Absolutely. Thank you, Ted. And hello, everybody. Well, good morning. So yeah, my name's Jamie. I'm the head of solutions here at My Staff Shop. We've been with the business a couple of years, and we've been through a really incredible and interesting journey over those couple of years, insofar as that we have become the first and only UK employee benefits company that is an employee ownership trust. So we are quite literally delivering benefits for your people by our people, which we think is pretty cool. And our ethos is really about creating enterprise grade solutions when it comes to employee benefits, but making those affordable, not just to those bigger companies, but indeed to all sizes of companies across the UK, because we're incredibly passionate and believe that everybody should have access to these things. They are really important for businesses to offer, and they can make an incredible difference in people's lives. So I think as far as working for a company goes, it's incredible to be able to work for a company that makes such a huge difference in so many different people's lives. So thanks for having me here today.
Oh, no way, man. Thank you for coming along. And also for our audiences, now I do know Jamie on a personal level, but maybe we'll get into that later. That's for another talk. We're here today, though, as we mentioned at the beginning, to talk about busyness and HR people being busy. And I think it's important to maybe give a bit of context as to this conversation, especially if you're sat at home, first off, maybe feeling really busy or overwhelmed, or kind of just feels like stuff can be really, really stacked on top of you. From my own perspective, I work with HR professionals day in, day out, and I can testify to the fact that every single day I hear feedback, people are just slammed. It is just a non-stop barrage of things, whether it's different projects, different integration projects that need to run, new technologies that need to come out, new policies that need writing, just tons and tons of stuff just piling on the top. We also, as a business at the People Experience Hub, ran a thing called the State of the People Profession, which you'll find actually in the resources tab of this webinar. And what we've discovered from that, aside from some of the challenges around strategic priorities, is HR has never felt so busy. It was actually like Nick's kind of forward in that about the challenges that you guys face, particularly around whether it's the cost of living crisis, the Great Resignation, we've got post-COVID stuff. Everything feels like it's really transactional, and there just hasn't been time to get into some of those strategic stuff pieces and really dig into that. But rather than like sort of focusing in on the HR thing, I wanted to take a step back and begin actually by asking the question is, why is everyone so busy at the moment? Because the whole world, it's not just HR that is busy. Myself and Jamie, we're not HR people, and neither is Mostyn, in fact. But yet, I also feel like I'm up against it all the time. But I'm going to start with you, Mr. Mostyn, if that's okay. Would you mind? Well, maybe let's start. Why do you think people are so busy at the moment?
So my take on this is, I think how we work has changed terribly over the last few years. And what that means is we are in much more of a constant communication state with our colleagues, much more than we were before COVID hit in 2020. And I think what we've done is we've kind of shoehorned old ways of working into a new remote hybrid model, which I think for most knowledge workers, sort of people who work in offices or, do a bit of hybrid or work from home, I think it's hugely inefficient. Things like, used to just be able to pop by someone's desk for a couple of minutes. Now that's a 20, 30-minute Teams call. So that the inefficiency has crept in. But also think, before 2020, we used some communication tools. I used to be a partner at KPMG, and we obviously have email, but we'd use Skype maybe for chat conversations, and we just started to introduce Teams, I think, in 2019. But now everybody's on Teams or Slack, and I think this constant communication means that we're really inefficient. So even if the level of work that we were doing is the same as it was sort of pre-2020, I actually think the way that we work now is much more inefficient, and that is leading to us feeling and being busier than we have been previously. And it wasn't perfect before either.
No, I don't think it was. And I think you're right. The world has changed so dramatically. Perhaps some of the processes that we built around work are not yet fit for purpose. Jamie, have you got a take on that? Actually, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on why do you think the world is so busy?
It's a great question, and I think part of this comes down to the globalization and through connectivity. It's kind of touching on the point that Mostyn made, and there is a lot more competition these days across businesses, across roles in any business, apart from those kind of businesses that are geographically kind of ring-fenced, like your local corner store that sells physical produce, as an example. So many businesses now are digital. They rely on digital communication. They might have digital products. And the workforces as well, you can literally work from anywhere. And so it's kind of opened up to a lot of businesses. It's not just the people that are necessarily in your town or in your city. You're now competing with people from potentially across the globe for those positions. And so I think there's a bit of needing or feeling like you need to do more in order to kind of get yourself your head above the parapet. And so I think that's potentially something to do with it. But, you know, coming back to Mostyn's point, we're just so much more connected than we were before, and it's so much easier to be constantly on. And I wonder, does that invite inefficiencies? Does it invite us to have unnecessary conversations? Is it a case of the task expanding to fill the time allocated to it, but now because we're so connected, actually that time is just infinite? You know, there is no on-off button, and so more and more tasks keep coming in because we think we've got this capacity. And I think we've seen this in some of the work from home initiatives as well. There's been reports that I've read where actually people now working from home are working longer hours. They're doing, or they're getting involved in more things just because there isn't that physical separation between I'm in the office and this is where I do my work, I'm at home and this is where I'm with my family.
I think that's so true. The idea that you're just, because you're on more, you've got more capacity to do more. I just don't think stacks up at all. Paula, I'm going to throw it to you as well. I think actually, and I'm curious, maybe if we zone in from like this, the general populace to actually HR specifically, why do you think HR has encountered this challenge, and why do you think HR people are busier than they've ever been?
Well, the first thing I want to say is just linked to the broader general point. Oliver Burkeman wrote a book called 4,000 Weeks, and I don't know if anybody's read it, but it's a really good read. And it actually addresses this issue, which absolutely both of you have outlined. You know, it is about the technology change, it is about the society change, and that flows into our workplaces. But what he addresses in that book is, you know, you can only get to a certain point with productivity initiatives and being more productive, etc., before that starts to reverse. And we've only got 4,000 weeks on the planet if we live till we're 80. Depressing thought. So actually what he's talking about in that book is there is an infinite amount of things that we would want to do, and we do want to do, but there is a finite amount of time. And I think what that invites for us is an opportunity for self-leadership in this, actually, to start to actually make some decisions about what we do, rather than being driven by sort of an organizational structure that actually drives those things. And that's not to say that's not important, because you've got to have, you know, join up, etc. So if I lead that into the HR profession, the reason that flows into the HR profession is if the business is busier and everyone is busier, business is people. So everything is about people. So that is part of it. I think the other part of it is that there are so many things that are now expected of our leaders and expected in workplaces, from whether it's inclusion to well-being to, you know, a broader sense of different ways of working, which are all about the way humans work and interact together. I think what's actually happening is the effects of those happening to our workplaces. The downstream effect is that results in all the downstream things that HR do in organizations. And I'm not calling them downstream to downplay them. These are critical hygiene factors. But it's everything from skills recruitment all the way through to higher attrition, all the way through to grievance, all the way through to, you know, strategic workforce planning restructures. All of those things are amplified because of those changes. And HR is inevitably involved in all of those projects and all of that activity, plus supporting leaders through change. And we're in a huge change in the way that we work and what is expected of us in our workplaces. So I think, you know, you cannot get away from the fact that busyness everywhere results in busyness for people who work in the business of people, because business is people.
Business is people is going to be my new motto. But I think that's really true. And in particular, when we ran our State of the People Profession survey, we found that nearly 2/3 of HR people who responded said their biggest barrier to getting the things done they need to at work was budget. And I think so what you're hearing, what you're describing there, that there's this huge challenge around extra workload that gets piled on top, yet there is now less budget to kind of combat or kind of head up those things. You're going to hit this, not necessarily crisis point, but a pressure point, whereby actually we need more things to get more done, yet we haven't got the resources and capacity to do them. I think it leaves, I don't know if Jamie or Mostyn actually have got a view on this, but particularly for HR people, I think it just puts them in a real catch-22 where they haven't got the tools to do the jobs they need to do.
Yeah, that's me. Oh, go on, Mostyn.
No, go ahead, Paula.
No, the only thing I was going to say about that, and obviously really interested in other people's views, from my personal experience within, leading HR functions and so on, there are some. I actually think this creates a really interesting opportunity for HR leaders. Constantly talking about, the whole career has been about the strategic conversation and how do you move from operational to strategic. The critical nature of what you've just described means that we have to have critical conversations at the tops of organizations about what it takes to actually create the environments we need, whether that's the skills, the resources, the capability, and so on, and the resource it takes within our departments to actually deliver those things. And for years, we've been on a process of, making things more efficient through systems introduction and all of that kind of thing, taking out the equation that this work is deeply human. So it requires humans to be able to do that work. So that's just my view a little bit, as I think it drives a really interesting, critical strategic discussion for the CPOs who want to go and have those conversations.
Jamie, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, I was just going to add that there's almost a case of HR having to deal with a serious case of lag. And what I mean by that is they're kind of this bridge between the real world that's moving in real time at a really fast pace and where organizations and their people are actually at. And it's constantly kind of playing this game of catch up, isn't it? Whether that's through regulation, through compliance, through pay review, through benefits, whatever it might be. HR are constantly kind of battling between where the business is and where it needs to be and trying to bring it up to speed. And it's been a really challenging time over the last couple of years. I mean, obviously, we had COVID back in 2020, and that was a huge shock across economies all over the world. But since then, we had 2023, where at the end of 2022, I remember everyone was calling for recession, and it was all going to get super, super bad. Recession never came, and now we're in 2024, and we have this kind of improvement in global liquidity, and things are kind of looking better. But then we've got to remember that the elections are coming up at the end of the year, so that's in part politicians wanting to make sure that not too many people are feeling too much pain, and so they're kind of stimulating things, and I think we'll continue to do so as we go into the end of the year. But then what does 2025 look like? Could we be facing another crunch point in come March, April 2025, and what's that going to look like for organizations across the world? So I think there's been really, for the last 4 going into 5 years, an incredible amount of uncertainty. So coming back to that resource point, it's been really difficult for businesses to make hay. Well, with all the COVID stuff that was going on, there's been a huge amount of catch up that those organizations have had to play, even though they've had initiatives like furlough to help them out through those periods. It was really difficult, and we lost a lot of businesses through that process. And now we're kind of revitalizing those industries. Businesses are just about getting on top, but still dealing with a huge amount of uncertainty when it comes to the economy and what the future holds. And that makes it very difficult to throw all the resources that are required into the HR teams kind of initiatives, where they're, as I said, constantly trying to keep up and bridge this gap between where the world is and where it's going and where the organizations are.
I remember when the lockdown thing all kicked off, there was just so much that was put onto HR around, right, we've got to be fully remote all of a sudden. We've got to figure out how to do that. We need these disease policies that we haven't really thought about before. We've got to think about this return to the office and all this, it just kept happening. There was more and more things. Mostyn, you look like you had something to say there.
Yeah, no, I was in a HR leadership role at that time when I was at KPMG, and totally agree with what you just said there in terms of, right, okay, it's a lot more focus on sort of people priorities and can you deal with this sort of stuff. But I also think that, and then there was other challenges over the last, well, since then, they've kind of been forced on the people profession to deal with in terms of changes in how people are working, and some of those other challenges that Jamie and Paula mentioned in terms of what businesses are having to deal with. So to a certain extent, there are these things that the HR function has had to deal with, no choice. Obviously still, had some business as usual activity to keep going along. I suspect some of that, was deprioritized to a certain extent. And then there would have been other things that the HR department was planning on doing before all these other things got foisted on them. So there's a huge element, I think, of backlog and catch up that's probably happening around now, which is, well, okay, we've got some of these other things that were forced on us over the last few years, maybe settling down a bit, but we've got all, catch up from, missing out on not being able to do some of the things for the last few years. And that, I imagine, is, contributing specifically for the HR profession to levels of busyness.
Hugely. And we certainly saw that in the report as well. Like there was multiple, aside from this sort of gap in available resources and sort of the challenges around that, this backlog has been clearly identified. And we actually see it. There was a really interesting one about normally we would expect retention to be the #1 strategic priority. It has been for the last few years when we've run the report. This year actually was really different. We actually saw that it was to do with building people management capability and developing leadership talent that became the most important things that people were telling us. And when we reflected on it and sort of dug around the data a bit more, it's really to do with just these change, the way businesses are changing. And again, that emphasis on HR to have to combat the very strategic stuff, yet being stuck in the transactional. Like we are still dealing with this backlog of different projects and different things that are on the go. We need our leaders to actually be picking up some of these other pieces. We need our business leaders to be working on culture, engagement, trust, those sorts of things. Yet the available opportunity and capacity to do them is still really, really small. I think it's really, really challenging. Does that sound like something you'd agree with, Paula?
Yeah, completely. So I think that, so this is not a new problem, the stuck in the transaction and not really being able to get to the strategic work. I think this is an ongoing challenge, because the range of things that the HR function is responsible for looking at is huge. Everything from culture and strategic resourcing and succession and leadership and all of those things, all the way through to, payroll and recruitment of certain roles. It's everything through a transactional to strategic continuum. And I think there are few other functions and capabilities that have that absolute breadth. So you have to be able to play tunes on all of those things, because they are actually completely interrelated. So, and I sometimes get concerned with the view that those, what I call them sort of hygiene factors, but these kind of necessary operational things are strategic, actually, because what's happening there feeds the strategic decisions in the organizations and vice versa. So it's not that we will be strategic once those problems have been solved. They won't ever be. No, I've been doing this for nearly 30 years, and the operational requirements of people within collective spaces isn't ever going to change or go away. What I'm interested in is how do we reduce some of that? And I think we've probably got as far as we can. There probably is more we can do with AI around the systemization of that, but it's not systemization on its own. And so the leadership question that comes in, which I'm passionate about, because fundamentally that question of leadership capability has been, if it's not the top, it's been practically at the top of every conversation I've ever had with a senior leader, CEO, permanent secretary that I've ever worked with. How do we build the leadership capability? Rather than leading tasks, we're leading people. And that shift and that capability, if the HR function are able to play into that and support leaders with that more, it makes a fundamental difference. Otherwise, what we find ourselves doing is clearing up, the situation where those leadership interventions, that leadership quality, the building of great cultures, has sort of not enabled the most thriving of workplaces. And I say that with great love and appreciation. I think most leaders I've ever met, most leaders I've ever met are absolutely amazing people, really, really good people trying their best. And yet there is a skill set gap between leading tasks and leading people. And HR, are the function on the ground to be able to help to build that capability.
100%. I want to zone in a little bit, because I think we've established, it's no surprise, HR crazy busy, right? I kind of want to zone in a little bit on some of the sort of how elements of it. What can be done about this? What can people do to combat this challenge? And I think, Mostyn, you had some really interesting first, like, just principles and insights, I guess. That'd be a great place maybe to jump off on.
Yeah, sure. So this isn't for HR specifically, but would apply for HR professionals. And it links to the point I made earlier about, well, I think everybody is so busy as a result of this near constant communication and sort of levels of connectivity with the people in our teams or the people that we work with most closely. And my solution to combating that, so I certainly noticed that when I was in my roles at KPMG, also notice it now sort of running my own business. And the solution, I think, that's worked for some of the clients that I work with and some of the companies that I work with is this notion that I have of being strategically unavailable. And being strategically unavailable means that you are not available to your teams for particular periods of time, whatever you want to define that as. Normally it works best for people, for maybe 2 or 3 hours a day, if they want to do it that frequently, but you're deliberately not available to your teams so that you can actually focus on your most important work. Now, this is it's a pretty simple concept. I think the difference between how I used to think about it and how I think about it now is that I think people have a level of guilt about not being available to their teams because that's what we've all got used to so much over the last few years, and that you're always online and that you're always responsive and you'll get an immediate response and all of that sort of stuff. So when you're strategically unavailable, all of that is on hold for 2 to 3 hours so you can focus on your most important work. But the mindset shift is I have to do that so that I can actually get my most important work done at a time of day when my brain is actually working, as opposed to just being on messages and calls and meetings all throughout the day. And then I think for a lot of professionals, they then actually do the hardest part of their job in the evening or on the weekends when, for most people, that's not a great time of work to do. It's not a great time of day to do your most important work. So it's getting some strategic unavailability into your day, I think, is a solution for that problem of being constantly connected.
I'll be really honest. When I heard you say that the first time, my first thought was, nah, I've not got that. That is not possible in the world I live in. Yet I really sat on it. And it was one of the few things that has really lingered with me for a long time as a concept, because I firmly believe as an individual and as someone who's very passionate about things like mental health, that you need to protect yourself. It's the oxygen mask analogy, right? You want to make sure you're taking care of yourself so you can take better care of the people around you. And actually, as I sat with it and thought about it, it really was like, yeah, it's not about being rude or being like saying like, no, I'm not going to talk to you. It's about being clear about broadcasting to people about my intention is in this time, I'm going to do the things I need to do so I can spend the rest of my time doing the things that are also happening. Right. Is that a fair summation of it?
Yeah, I think and this isn't I'm only doing this for myself, I don't care about anybody else. So this isn't a selfish act. You have the conversation with the people that you work with most closely, and depending on your role in the team, you either ask them or encourage them to work in this way too, because what you find happens is not only are you able to get your most important work done better and more quickly, because you're not doing 20 minutes here, 15 minutes there, half an hour here, there, which is really, really inefficient. You're able to focus on it for a set period of time. Your team then does the same thing as well. So they're actually able to get what is their most important work done better and quicker. And as a result of that, they actually need your help less. So they don't need to be in constant communication with you, constantly asking you questions, asking for your views on things, because they're actually able to get, their most important work done themselves. So it's a team, sort of has benefits for the whole team. It's not just about the individual.
I think one thing that's really popped into my mind as you're saying this as well, and Paula and Jamie, I'd love your thoughts on this in a minute, maybe. One of the most exhausting parts of any job, mine in particular, I would say, but I think any job, is when you have to change lanes constantly. They're like this kind of switching of hats, or however you want to frame it. Like all of a sudden I'm working on, it might be a project around a new client, and then I'm doing some marketing, and then I'm doing some other sales stuff. But jumping into all these different lanes, I feel exhausted by the end of it. And I feel HR having so many different hats is just going to see this amplified 10 times. Maybe Paula, have you got a view on that? Is that maybe a fair way of looking at it?
Well, I think we know from research that if you shift from one thing to the other, if you then want to go back to the thing that you were doing, it takes you 20 minutes every time to kind of, we cannot, as a species, we cannot multitask. We actually just do lots of different things, and it takes hours. So that's why it takes all the energy. And I really like, Mostyn's suggestion about the strategic time, because I actually think this is what I mean when I say we have to take leadership of our agenda ourselves. Because if we are just responding to, I call it like the snowplow effect. It's this it's email, but now it's not just email, because it's probably on a Teams channel, then you've probably got a WhatsApp group, then you might have something, there's multiple different things, plus the Outlook calendar full of meetings. you know, and if that's what we do by the end of the week, you look at it and you're like, well, I've done all of these things for everybody else, but I haven't actually achieved, you know, the big presentation and the thinking behind it that I needed to do for this. So I think it's, what do you put in first? And I always think of that as a sort of a, you know, thinking about it from a legacy perspective. You know, when I coach people, this comes up so much. It's not just within HR, it's everybody who's in leadership, is busyness. In actual fact, you know, if I'm able to look sort of 12 months forward, and I think in 12 months time, what are the 3 things that I really need to have shifted or done or achieved? That's the work that goes in first. I have to make sure that that's what I've got space for. And I really liked your point about the team and so on, because I think there's a really important upstream set of conversations that we can all have with each other about expectations. Because at the end of the day, if we're waiting for someone else to prioritize what we're doing, and put this in the HR professional context, there's so many things, you know, that will need to be left undone. And they're going to be undone. Things will be undone, whether you follow the path of the snowplow or whether you actually create your own, you know, clearing method based on what you're trying to achieve long term for the business. But that's an expectations conversation, because somebody could then say, oh, well, actually, no, this other thing is really important. That's good. That's a good conversation to have. But at the end of the day, those are really important ways of us getting in front of and in charge of an infinite set of things that don't fit into our day. So I'm less snowplow, more legacy.
I love that.
Ed,
Jamie, have you got any thoughts on? Oh, sorry, go on, Mustard, please.
I just wanted to pick up quickly on this one point that Paula makes. I think it's really important, which is this point that you prioritize those things that are really important that you want to get done over whatever time period you're looking at, whether it's, you know, this week, this month, this year, whatever it is. But you've identified, okay, those are the most important things, and actually being, you know, unavailable to my team so I can focus on those. Yes, that helps me to do them. From a busyness perspective, if you're just busy doing all the other stuff, then you've still got to do this work at the end of the day or on the weekend, so you're even busier. But perhaps even more importantly than that, if you're not making progress on those things that are really important, that contributes much more to stress than if you're not getting the stuff that isn't important done. And I think what happens for most of us is our day gets filled up actually with the less important stuff. So we're not only busy, but we're more stressed because we haven't actually been able to make progress on those most important things. So I think Paula's point about, you know, what are those 3 most important things you need to do over a particular time period? I think it's really important for people to recognize that if you don't get that done, that's a huge contributor to stress levels.
I was going to ask, one of my questions was going to be about skills that you should be working on to ensure that you're kind of combating this business thing. Sounds like hard prioritization feels really important. Is there anything I'll actually just throw it out to you all, you guys, like in terms of thinking about how you would start addressing these, what type of skills or I guess strategies you might deploy within yourself to try and combat this? Has anyone got any like good suggestions outside of just being like very priority driven? Jamie, you're nodding, so I'm thinking you've got something to say.
Yeah, so I think we're all very good at scheduling our meetings. We're all very good at scheduling those important tasks that we need to do, or the catch-up call or follow-up, whatever it might be. But in my experience, what we're terrible at is actually scheduling in thinking time. And Paula alluded to this, but in order to be strategic, the first thing you need to do is to sit down and schedule half an hour, 20 minutes, an hour, whatever you can, to just sit and ponder some questions. What are the most important things? What are my strategic goals? And it reminds me of when many years ago, I was managing a manufacturing facility. It was like a woodworking workshop. And alongside managing this facility, I was dealing with all of the purchasing for the business, purchasing and procurement as well. And I can remember like it was yesterday, I was sat in my office in the workshop and I had all of this production stuff I needed to handle. I had a team to manage. I had constant phone calls coming in from site of all these materials and things that needed to be ordered. And they had to be there by a certain day, a certain time. Otherwise, I had teams of people on site who would be without work and they'd be costing an arm and a leg just to sit there and do nothing. And I was getting so many calls and so many interruptions that I wasn't actually getting any chance to sit and work through all of the orders that were coming in and all the other things that I needed to do. And I just remember sitting in my office feeling so overwhelmed and just so helpless. And so my strategy then was, right, okay, so first thing I need to do is just get all of this stuff out of my head, because up there, it's not clear. And so by writing it down into a list, I can just gets it out of my head and makes it real. And then from there, I looked at that list and I said, right, what are the things on this list that if I do, will either remove other things from the list altogether or make other things easier and quicker to accomplish. And so it's kind of going through and almost prioritizing all the different things I had to do, and then just basically started with the high priority stuff and started working through. And Paula made a great point. You've sometimes just got to accept you're not going to get everything done. And I remember sat in my office, sat in my chair, looking at the list. I'd done my prioritization. I was like, right, I know what's important and what's less important. And then it was just a case of, I'm not going to finish all this, so I'm just going to crack on. And sometimes I think that putting that pressure on yourself of all this needs to be done and it needs to be done by 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock or whatever time constraint you give yourself, that in and of itself can constrain your cognitive abilities to the point where you can't make progress, or you end up almost just kind of sitting there staring at your list of to-do things and not actually making progress. And so I've actually got a post-it note on my computer screen to this day, which just says, don't get distracted, just do something. And what I found was that as I started to work through that list, I just did something, and then I just did the next thing, and then the next thing. And actually, what I thought was completely unachievable, by the end of the day, the whole list was done, and I couldn't believe it. So I think just employing simple strategies to keep your cognitive stress as low as possible, really get good optics on prioritizing what's important and what's not important. But above and beyond all of that, I would never have achieved that turnaround in my mindset if I hadn't have just taken half an hour of what was a crazy day. I could not afford to take half an hour of my day to sit and think. I needed to do, but actually taking that half hour to just sit and think, prioritize, that made all the difference. And that was the difference between getting that list done, making sure everyone had what they needed when they needed it, and having stuff left over at the end of the day. But totally agree with Paula. Just accept the fact that you're probably not going to get everything done, especially for those CPOs, HRDs that are, higher level. They've got all that operational, but all the strategic, and then the teams to manage as well. And not to mention as well, HR is unlike any other department in a business. Like, you've got a sales department, they focus on sales, right? If you've got a marketing department, they focus on marketing. Ops focus on ops. HR has to get involved with sales, marketing, ops, because guess what, guys? They're all people. And that's what HR deals with. So HR is not one department, it's all departments, which is just crazy when you think about it.
I think you touched on something really important and I'm sure will be close to the hearts of everyone on this call, but equally anyone watching, which is that feeling of overwhelm when the busyness gets too much. I have noticed a huge increase in the amount of conversations people are having about burnout and just the challenges and stresses of work. It's no surprise, I've been there, and I think, Mostyn, I recall you mentioning, I think you've had a similar sort of experience as that as well. But Paula, I'm absolutely certain you'll have been there too. Is what do you think is triggering, aside from this excessive busyness? Why is HR struggling, I think, with this in particular? Because I notice it across the board of like sales professionals I know, but I see it in HR probably more prevalently. Why do you think they're feeling it so much more?
Well, so I think the thing is that where does everything go? Where does all the human emotion in an organization go? When everyone else is busy, everyone's leaning on, the confidant that they've got, it's probably an HR business partner, the stresses they've got around their team, not necessarily all joining up because they haven't had time to lead them effectively, but, where does that all go? So actually, I sometimes sort of think when you're an HR professional, you're kind of carrying around this backpack, and everybody's just wandering around putting their stuff in your backpack and you're carrying it for everybody, but you've also got your own, feelings and emotion. Where do you go with that? And so I do think there is an emotional burden, or it could be a stressful burden, or something that's felt uniquely by people professionals. I also think that, and this comes back to the leadership question, which is, ultimately the many people who come up into leadership positions, good people, as I've said, that come up into leadership, are coming up through their professional discipline or through tenure. But in actual fact, they see some of the work of leading their people as side of the desk. or that HR will do it. And in actual fact, that is a real challenge. And HR, we are sometimes guilty of being the rescuer. So we will come in and rescue many of these leaders from it, because we have to. Someone's got to deal with these human situations. But in actual fact, what we're not doing is we're not building capability that helps us out of that cycle in the long run. Because it's great if I'm a line manager and I'm a bit stressed and busy, and someone else comes and rescues me from having to deal with something, I'm going to go back and ask you to do that again and again. So I think there's a cycle here. What I'm really interested in is sort of two main things from HR specifically, and there's loads I could talk about this. I've built a whole program around the fact that there's actually a real professional opportunity for HR, but it's challenging to get out of the situation we're in. One is, I think there's a brilliant question that I think everyone, any leader should ask, but particularly those in HR, which is just, what is the point? If someone is sending you something or you're going to a meeting, what is the point of this? And it goes back to that kind of ruthless prioritization of, where do I add value? What is the point? What are we actually going to do as a result of this conversation? Whatever. It's just such a good conversation to get to the hub of ruthless. Where do I spend my value and time? The second one is, I do think when we are in rescuer mode and we're really, really busy and we're trying to sort out all of these challenges and issues and operational problems, there's a confidence actually that I think we can bring, which is, it's an intuitive confidence, but we're sometimes pushed to the side because we don't have the right data, or, it's not a sort of a hard-nosed conversation. But actually, no, we're not going to recruit 200 people within 4 weeks. Because actually, the market can't do that. We can't do that. Let's go back to the strategic question. Why do you want to do that? Are there other ways? But actually saying no sometimes and creating the space for a strategic conversation where we can be heard upstream, rather than, oh my goodness, this decision has been made and now we've suddenly got to recruit 200 people in 4 weeks in a market that probably doesn't have the skill set. So this is an example, but confidence and boldness and what is the point are kind of mantras that I think we have to be able to bring into our work to do it well.
100%. I think, again, you touched on something really important there. And I feel like as part of this conversation, what's really coming to light for me is the emotive toll that a lot of this stuff leaves at HR's door. And I don't know that many HR professionals who have organizational psychology or therapeutic training and qualifications. And I think that makes it, yet there's this expectation that they can just deal with the emotive and just leave it with that. HR will deal with it is a phrase I've heard a lot. And actually when we ran our report and our survey, we found that about 50% of people said they are unable to do the things they need to do because of organizational culture. And I was kind of, when you read into that, that could be, you can think about that in terms of, however you want to define culture. But I see it as things are unwilling to change, and things are unwilling to, that mentality of, well, what are HR for hasn't really evolved over the last few years like I would have expected it to, considering how much the job has changed and how much work has also changed. Perhaps it's time to rethink what HR's, not what its role is, but actually how it goes about defining itself within these businesses. And actually this leads on to maybe like the sort of the next section, I guess, which is around HR's leadership and its actually seat at the table at the moment. So I think one of the challenges, and I mean, Paul, actually, maybe start with you on this because you'll have a really clear view. One of the things we identify, and I certainly see, is with all these things that HR need to do, they have been mandated to accomplish certain activities, tasks, projects, whatever you want to call them, yet they haven't got the available resource to do so. Now, there's an argument, I know you could make that if HR had the seat at the table it believes it has, it wouldn't be struggling for resource, yet they still are. Does that indicate that actually the seat at the table isn't as genuine or as authentic as we believe it to be, and maybe there's more work to be done? Would that be your take on it?
I think it's a really complicated question. And this conversation about what are HR for, as I say, I think this has been going on ever since I've been, in the profession, since sort of the mid-90s, when Ulrich kind of talked about move to shared services and, moving from 70% transactional to 30%. I mean, I really don't think that fundamentally a huge amount has changed, and yet everything's changed. You know, we've completely restructured the way that an HR function works, and yet we've actually still got the same problem and challenge. So I actually think this is a human leadership challenge. It's not really about HR, but I think the solution is with HR. And so when I talk and I coach to senior HR leaders and we talk about these types of things, what I want to really encourage as a movement is we are sort of waiting for two things in order to take up that space and take up that seat. The first thing we're waiting for is permission from our leaders to be able to talk, you know, more broadly about these topics, to be able to hand things to them, to expect them to do some of this leadership work, etc. There's a permission piece. The second piece, but we're asking for permission to do something that a lot of those leaders have never experienced because they think HR is transactional. So they haven't experienced the strategic piece. The second bit is that we're waiting for all the operational transactional stuff to get, you know, systematized, to get less busy, so that when that happens, then we can be strategic. My view is neither of those things are going to happen without us making them happen. So I think we actually need to acknowledge that there is a huge amount of operational strategic activity that is solved by systems, but also needs a human front end. And we need to make sure that that human front end is in place, where humans deal with leaders and help them. Because that's why HR business partners are largely dealing with operational questions and activity, sort of triaging those ahead of shared services or systems. But we need to acknowledge it and make sure that we fight for and put in resources to handle that. Otherwise, we'll always be stuck in that trap. Yeah. The piece around asking for permission, we just actually have to go and occupy this space and be really bold. You know, I talked about boldness and confidence. And the reason we build that is we build evidence base. We understand the external view. We build our case around strategic workforce planning, which to me is not resource planning. It's a holistic approach to needs analysis of people within the organization. And we are much bolder about putting forward those solutions to organizations which are surprise and delight. You know, this isn't work that anybody can do. We have a professional expertise, and let's really, really amplify that. But if we're waiting for those two other things, you know, that's been something we've been waiting for, you know, my entire career. And I'm really looking for, you know, us to step up and not get caught up in the busyness, waiting for those two things to be able to bring our professional expertise into the strategic arena.
Yeah, Mostyn, do you have a view on this? I can see you look like you want to say something.
Yeah, I wonder whether there has been a bit of a shift in terms of the impact that people professionals, HR professionals have on things like employee engagement and employee well-being. And I think maybe, you know, 5-6 years ago, there wasn't as much belief that those things were as important as perhaps people think they are about now, in terms of the productivity of those individuals in the company. So people might have had a view that, okay, these are nice things for our employees to have. We want our employees to be engaged. We want them to have, you know, good employee well-being. I think what we've learned over the last few years is that if you don't have those things, then productivity takes a real hit. And therefore, whilst it's still quite intangible and indirect, the impacts that you can have on some of these things, the fact that it's important to do so, I suspect is sort of much higher up the sort of, people recognize that a lot more. Whereas I think before, you know, if you're changing something in, I don't know, in the operations of a business, it's very easy to say, well, if I change this, well, it's going to cost this much less, and therefore this is the direct impact. Obviously, when we're dealing with people and, you know, how people are, you know, sort of their levels of engagement, it's more intangible. But I think the thing that has changed is people have realized that even though it's intangible, we realize that there is something there and we can improve this, and therefore let's sort of direct some money towards that.
It's a bit, this could sound really cheesy, but I always I think about employee engagement a bit like love. Like it's very difficult to understand and a bit difficult to measure, but it doesn't mean it's not real. And I think there it is, right? And however you want to go about defining engagement or culture or any of those sorts of things, like, doesn't change the fact that they are happening and your influence on them is vast, even if you're not understanding like how you're doing it or what it's doing. Like it's still there. Amazing. Look, we are coming near towards the end of our time, and there's a few more things. There's one big thing actually I did want to touch on before we look to kind of wrap things up today. one of the suggestions that I've seen around this challenge of busyness, and the thought that kind of comes up in the world, is to do with HR's, I guess, like its place and the seat at the table. And as we said before, like whether how genuine and authentic that is, I think is still up for debate slightly. But ultimately, the biggest thing that HR can be doing to be more strategic is getting more involved with the commercial side of the business and really getting that commercial acumen piece together. And I've seen a few posts on LinkedIn actually about it, saying, you know, if you want to be a successful HR practitioner in the future and set yourself up to succeed now, you need to get your head in the numbers today. I'm going to start with Jamie. Actually, Jamie, do you think that's a fair way of looking at HR at the moment? Do you think that would help them combat some of this business by getting more commercially aware and being effectively more linked with the business success?
I think so, and I think actually it will help both sides, because ultimately, if you think about what a business is there to achieve, it's there as a commercial enterprise, it's there to generate a profit. And the reality is that if a business is doing well, it's growing, it's generating those profits, in theory, everybody in the business should benefit from that, because you've got more resources, you've got more finances, you can throw more money at things, you can do more things for your people. So I think it really does all come back to it. And back in my coaching days, I used to work with lots of businesses as a management consultant, and actually we would look at the hierarchy in the business, and the way we would map out the KPIs is we would always start at the top. So we say, well, what are the overarching business objectives here? And invariably they're going to be, we want to grow our annual revenue, we want to increase profitability, we want to improve and increase our productivity and retention across our workforce, and we want our customers to think we're absolutely fantastic. And so I think one of the most important things to do is to map every single KPI that sits below that. I call that kind of level 1. Then you look at level 2, which is your director team. Then you've got level 3, which is your management. Level 4 is your frontline staff. And the way I look at it, even those KPIs that drive performance at the level 4, they should all feed into level 3. They should all feed then into level 2, and they should all then feed into level 1. And so I think understanding that from HR's point of view and how all of those different levels feed into one another is really going to help when you come to ask for support, ask for resources, and you need to demonstrate how that's ultimately going to benefit the business. Understanding that if the business benefits, assuming you've got a good business model, then all of the people in that business will benefit as well.
I think it sounds like talking about helping it prioritize, if nothing else. Like what are the tasks that need doing? Paul, have you got a view on that?
Well, I do. So I feel that this question of HR aren't commercial enough, I feel like it's such a red herring question, and I'm just going to boldly say this. I think in my experience, I don't think there's any lack of commerciality, understanding what business is there for, understanding the outcomes in most HR professionals that I've worked with. And I think this label that, sometimes this labeling that HR aren't commercial because they're focused on people, I find a really interesting set of conversations. And I'm interested in a slightly different angle on it, which is, what do we actually mean when we say commercial? Because in actual fact, what you want around that table is a group of people who are looking at who you serve and what problem you're solving, which is why all organizations exist. They exist to solve a problem or to serve people. And to make, to grow and to create profitability through doing those things, right? But you want a mixture of people in a diverse team, bringing different perspectives to that. And so you want, really hard numbers conversation. I've met most HR people can have a very hard-nosed numbers conversation. They're going to bring some other evidence to that, which is sort of making sure that that fits in with a humanistic system, which is full of people who have feelings and who, have sensitivities and all other sorts of things. And so I think the matching of those things is the real magic and art of HR. So do I think that HR professionals need to be able to express the return on investment for things that they're looking for investment in? Yes. And do they need to get better at doing that, using a wider frame of reference, using external evidence? Yes, I think absolutely. Do I think that HR professionals fundamentally lack commercial acumen? No, I don't think they do. I think most HR professionals are extremely at the front line of across most functions in the business. And in actual fact, the one commercial critical factor of commerciality that is missing in many organizations is cross-functional collaboration. HR professionals have that in abundance because we work across the whole industry and the whole organization more so than almost any other function. So I actually think I would love HR professionals to stand up and say, no, this isn't about me building more commercial acumen. It's about how I am able to express this really important part of intuitive business, of, the way that we feel and how we're leading humans into a conversation that has largely in the past been about data, dynamics, money, etc. And that, I think, is an art and a science that is going to be so important for the future of most organizations. So I have a slightly different take on it, because I actually don't think that HR people lack commercial experience.
I absolutely love that take as well, because so I think part of the problem is you're saying it comes across to me. There's a phrase I saw about HR being pink and fluffy. And again, my experience of HR people is not that, generally speaking. There is a perception issue, perhaps, and maybe this is where this narrative and rhetoric stems from, around actually what, again, maybe the question we were trying to answer before, like what are HR for and how are they perceived, is probably radically different in reality to the perception. Mostyn, have you got any thoughts on this?
I think just quickly, I suppose if there is that perception that you just mentioned, Ted, of people in the HR profession, then what can they do in order to help increase their influence within the organization? I think demonstrating a solid understanding of the mechanics of the finances of the business, how this business makes money, I think, can help in stating their case. My experience is most businesses aren't actually that complex, and I suspect most people who work in HR understand how the business makes money. But actually, just being proactive and demonstrating that they've got that understanding, if to try and overcome that perception that you mentioned.
Yeah,
I think then it comes down to, yes, we need to articulate what the benefits are of these things that we're doing, and some of those benefits we might be able to directly translate into monetary benefits. For example, if we increase our retention of employees, then these are the costs that we save in terms of recruitment or whatever. So some things have a more direct link to finances. Other things like productivity, you can have a direct link to finances there. Other things like engagement or how happy people are can influence the quality of the work that people do, which in a lot of organizations is less tangible in terms of being able to say, well, how do you measure the quality and how does that translate to sort of bottom line at the end of the day? But it's a good thing. So I think knowing, am I dealing with something here that I can actually translate into bottom line impact that I can quantify, or am I dealing with something here which we know is a good thing if this metric goes up? And articulating the difference between the two, I think that's quite a good skill for HR professionals to have.
I love that. We are coming to the end of our time. I could talk to you guys all day, frankly, and I would have a lovely time. But sadly, I have things to do because I am also a busy man. Before we go, though, I just thought I'd ask round you guys for if you had one key takeaway, one key thought around combating busyness for people watching. I'm actually going to start with you, Paula, if you don't mind. What would be your one little nugget of information to pass along to people?
It's my fundamental question. So what is the point, and what are the three things that I need to do in order to make a difference? And if you hook onto those things as your North Star, you start to make some radical differences in what you do.
I love that. Mr. Keeling, have you got a final thought for our audience?
I'm going to come to the Serenity Prayer, which I just absolutely love. And I think it's really important to accept the things you cannot change the things you can, and have the wisdom and courage to know the difference.
Huge and stoic. I love that. And finally, Mostyn, your final thoughts.
As you might have guessed, Ted, I think my main suggestion is for people to embrace being strategically unavailable for at least part of the day so they can get their most important work done, and they can help their teams get their most important work done as well. People want to know more. If you search strategically unavailable on LinkedIn, you'll find out more about it.
Amazing. And as well, any one of our attendees, you'll see the resources. We've put some stuff in there about all our guests and Moston stuff there. I will also will be, if you go and have a look at any of them, particularly following on from this, if you see any of our profiles, do give us a follow. I'm sure all our contact details and stuff are on there. And if you have any questions, do feel free to reach out to any of us. But that is it for today. I just want to say thank you so much to my amazing, beautiful panel, especially Jamie for jumping in at the last minute and coming and sharing such valuable insights. It's been amazing to have you all. If you have any further questions, do feel free to get in touch. But for now, go forth and hopefully have a less busy day. And as always, take care and be excellent to each other. Peace out.